You see, deep down, we all want to feel like we measure up, like we're acceptable, like we're lovable. Deep down, we all want to feel like we're great in some way. And our default position in pursuing greatness is to fight for it. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, let me explain using wokeness as an example. All right, so it doesn't get much more relevant for 2022 than to look at the woke movement, but it's only an example. What I want us to understand is that wokeness is simply the latest example of what every generation does to pursue greatness. All right, so deep down, we want to be great, we want to be acceptable, we want to be lovable, but deep down, we know we're not. All right, we know that if people could actually see our thoughts, could actually see how messed up we are, they would find that we're not lovable, not acceptable, not great. And so what we do is we try to cover this up. And the way we cover it up is by choosing a characteristic that we possess, all right, and then we elevate that characteristic to be the most important characteristic a human can have. We say this is the most important thing a human can do or say or think, okay? So these are things like looks or success or popularity or money or family, you name it. We pick a characteristic and we elevate it to ultimate status. And what that does is two things. So first, we get to boast. Right? I have the most coveted of characteristics, so I must be great. But our pride doesn't end there. C.S. Lewis says in his book Mere Christianity that pride is essentially competitive. So he says this, pride gets us no pleasure, pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next person. All right? And so what we also do is not only do we get to boast about what we have, but we look down on anyone who doesn't have this most coveted of characteristics. So, take the woke movement, for example. Now, you'll be forgiven if you haven't heard of the term woke before. It's only been around for about 4 or 5 years. But the phrase woke means to be aware of, all right, to be alert to be awake to the injustices that marginalised people suffer. Okay, so to be woke means to be aware of what African Americans have suffered. It is to be alert to what Australian Aboriginals have suffered. It is to be awake to what the LGBTQ plus community have had to suffer. And I hope we understand that that is a good thing, all right? It is good and noble to be aware of what marginalised people are suffering so that we can help alleviate that suffering, all right? But the phrase woke was considered a good and noble thing for about 5 minutes, okay? Within months of the woke movement emerging, it very quickly became a pejorative phrase. Now, here's the question. Why would being alert to the plight of marginalised people be considered a bad thing so quickly? Well, it's because very early on, the woke movement stopped being about a way to care for marginalised people and started being a way to virtue signal someone's greatness. Okay, so they took wokeness, a good thing, and a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people elevated it to be the most important characteristic a human can have. What they did so that they could show off, they could virtue signal that I have this most coveted of characteristics. All right? And it basically became a competition as to who could be the most woke. But alongside that competition, people started looking down on anyone who wasn't woke. And most people don't like being looked down on, do they? And so that's why it became this pejorative statement. It's basically what cancel culture has become, a way to look down on, a way to write off, a way to judge anyone who doesn't have this characteristic that I have. Now, the problem with pursuing greatness in this way is twofold. Right? So firstly, whenever we pursue greatness through a particular characteristic that we possess, we end up even more insecure. What I mean is this, all right? So to feel the need to virtue signal our supposed greatness betrays an already inherent insecurity, does it not? Like anyone who feels the need to show off, show off to the world how woke they are, for example, is already deeply insecure. But the problem is, how will we ever know if we're woke enough? Right? This is why people have been pushing wokeness to its absolute extreme. They're deeply insecure over whether their level of wokeness actually measures up. And so pursuing greatness through a particular characteristic, it's only going to deepen an already inherent insecurity. But the second ramification is it leads to social disintegration. Right? Looking down on those who don't possess this most coveted of characteristics is what is tearing the Western culture apart right now. Right? It's tribalism. Saying my tribe is better than your tribe. And so the woke tribe looks down on anyone who isn't woke, but now there's an anti-woke tribe. And the anti-woke tribe has elevated anti-wokeism to the most important characteristic, and they now look down on anyone who is woke. All right? It goes both ways, and it always has. Okay? Because this is how humans have always sought greatness. We fight for it. And what it's left with in the West is widespread insecurity and social breakdown.